Welcome to the Revenue Rewired podcast, hosted by StringCan Interactive's visionary CEO, Jay Feitlinger, and no-nonsense COO, Sarah Shepard. We're here to accelerate your revenue and give your marketing purpose. Well, welcome to this next episode of Revenue Rewired. Today, we're going to talk about marketing without a strategy. It's like driving blindfolded. Mid-market companies often fall into the trap of chasing marketing tactics without strategy, and that is like driving blindfolded. We love strategy at StringCan, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. I don't know that everyone has the same definition of strategy. And so let's actually start with, what is strategy in your words?
Oh my gosh. How much time do I have? Because it is a little hard to define. So, to make it, I guess, to simplify it or oversimplify it, I just feel like it's the deliberate, like high level approach that's gonna define the overarching plan. The challenge that I've noticed with a lot of organizations, regardless of the size, but especially with companies that are in that kind of mid-level season of their business, they are dealing with like internal, external resources, how to position the business against the market, acquisition efforts, like all that stuff. And so they end up having a lot of people and tools and whatnot doing various different things and not really understanding like how do you define true north? Like what is the direction we're trying to get to? So that's where I feel like the value of a strategy is it gives you that, again, deliberate high level approach of where you're trying to get to help define like what everyone should be focusing on and creating alignment. Does that make
Now,
sense?
yes, however, would you say strategy is a destination, like an outcome, or is it a journey?
Wow. Well, I guess I would say strategy is like the why and the what, where the tactics are more like the how. So on the destination side, unfortunately, you can word that numerous different ways. So if the destination is all about the why and the what around destination, then that's the strategy. It's not the how you're going to get there. Does
Well, I
that
think about some of our
make
clients
sense?
and they'll say, I need a strategy. And I think what do you think it is that they're asking? And you do all of our biz dev for the most part. Like, what is it if someone says to you, I need a strategy? Like immediately what goes into your mind and how do you unpack that for them?
So depending upon who I'm talking to, if it's a another visionary who we love the shiny objects, I often will word it like it's choosing where to play and how to win. That's how I would basically define what a strategy is. If it's a person more on the operational side that's basically drowning in like all these various different tactics, I often then will focus a bit more on like long-term ways to differentiate the brand and not just like short-term sales and lead generation. So again, it does depend on where they're at in their business and who I'm talking to, because back to your original question, the word strategy, I think, unfortunately, has gotten quite, diluted in how you would define it. But I think, again, no matter who I'm talking to, it's really about giving you clarity. So that way you aren't wasting time and or money on just randomly picking tactics and like, throwing at the wall and see what sticks. I think it gives you that direction of what you're trying to accomplish and why.
Yeah, it is hard when you see that kind of like dilution of even efforts and energy, right? So I see a lot of people, they end up coming to us because they've tried a bunch of things, but they end up becoming disparate because there is no end point, which is the strategy. Like, what is it you're ultimately trying to get toward? Which is, you need the roadmap, not a dartboard. And, you use the car metaphor a lot, which I think is
I love
really
it.
helpful. So Tell me a little bit about, tell our audience how the car metaphor ties into strategy. And we use it in so many different ways, like even the scary one, which is changing the tire as you're driving, which visualizing that sounds like a nightmare, but we do it a lot.
Well, again, you can use a car, you can use building a house. I do find that it does simplify the whole entire, conversation. But the car part is one that I love the most because, you can use the analogies or the examples of like the clown car, where, you got, this vehicle. And no matter what the situation comes into play, I can leverage a car story somehow. And so, like back to the clown car example, it's like a small car with a bunch of people inside, and everyone's kind of flying out and figuring out where to go. But another good example of that would be and this happens, I think, often with companies that are in that significant growth, trying to scale mode. Again, ties in really well to our ideal client on that, the mighty middle, the mid-market size is, budget and resources are typically two very common challenges of how to implement a solid strategy. And so without a strategy, again, I will say things like, you have this amazing vehicle like a Ferrari that you spend a fortune on, but it has no gasoline. It has no engine. It has no GPS system. It's just sitting there and it looks pretty, but it can't go anywhere. And so, the strategy is what's going to help you with, like on the GPS side, give you the direction so you can most effectively get to where you want to go.
So driving blindfold is like marketing without a strategy.
Yes, which I probably wouldn't recommend unless you're in an autonomous vehicle. But even there, I think that that'd be scary to me. It's like going in a Waymo car. I close my eyes intentionally because it's kind of scary watching it turn sometimes. But yes, you're right. I think that's a really good way to kind of present it is without the strategy, driving a car blindfolded obviously would be a pretty scary situation.
Yeah, and I think people come to us a lot because it does sound overwhelming. And frankly, I was actually shocked when I started at Shrink Can almost 10 years ago at how much work went into the strategy. I mean, it was like months long projects, so much research and detail. It was actually quite impressive for me to unpack how much detail went into a strategy and then to really appreciate why so many businesses were super struggling with it. So, if we were to give our audience a couple of tips maybe on understanding how to start approaching a strategy, let's say they want to maybe self implement or figure out a way to even unpack whether there's something there to work with an agency in the future, what would be the first thing you would want them to do?
So I think again, I'm thinking about, our meetings with our clients. And typically the conversation to your point there would first start out with, we want to do like, I don't know, Google Ads, and I'm just like, okay, well, just launching that without having the strategy is obviously going to be a huge waste of time and our money. And so what typically we would do with our clients, depending upon who we're speaking to, we often would want to start out with understanding, their market positioning. So like, what can you confidently say you can hold, a unique place in the market? What are your various different offerings? Just kind of getting a sense of like where they're at and then their business goals, as far as revenue or profit or whatever the situation might be. So that'd be the first part is like their vision of where they want to be. And then the second part that I think ties into all of the marketing part is all about the customer. Who is the ideal customer profile? And then again, here I would recommend being a bit selfish around, which ones could be the most profitable and or loyal. Thinking about, how do they think and what are they buying? Because once you get insane clarity, both on the demographic and psychographics, the motivations and behaviors of your ideal customer profile, the ICP, then everything else becomes really easy. So let me give you an example of that to your question. What a what a lot of companies that are strategic are thinking about is like things like competitors, like my competitive advantage. What I see typically happen is a an organization might be like, okay, our competitors are X, Y, and Z. It's the ones that are maybe the most well known. So, for example, like I'm trying to think of a situation. Let's say, for example, like you're Gold's Gym. Your competitors, they probably would say are like LA Fitness or Anytime Fitness or all those really well-known examples. But instead of thinking about it from that point of view of just going out and looking at the well-known competitors and looking at service level positioning, their messaging, their tactics, and then basing your entire marketing strategy off of trying to zig when they zag, the amount of opportunity you would significantly miss is tenfold. And so if you think about it differently, if you focus first on the ideal customer profile and truly understand their needs, the actual competitors you're thinking about comparing to and actually are often quite different. So again, I'm just going to keep using that analogy. I know I should probably use a car one because that's where you started with. That's where I immediately went to. I worked out this morning. Um, is back on the fitness side. Let's say, for example, the customers they could be most profitable with or most loyal, they might really appreciate uh, high-end, more concierge-based, one-on-one fitness experiences. And so, with that, all of a sudden you might uncover your competitor might be, that high-end, fitness coach that maybe has their own studio or maybe comes to your home and works out with you at your house. They're thinking all about those kind of situations. And so now all of a sudden your customer or your competitor set opens up. So let me try to go back into the car analogy. There are a lot of car manufacturers out there that have done a really good job at personalizing the experience. You have everyone from like a Carvana around delivering the car to you, and making it a lot more of an easier experience because their ideal customer wants that convenience and maybe is threatened by, coming into a dealership and being, dealing with that the haggling of the sales side. And so I think that's where I think the benefit of, to answer your question back on the customer profile side, if you can really nail that and dive in super deep, everything around not just the competitors, which then obviously can impact your messaging and your positioning, which then also can impact your tactics that you're going to focus on, and then also how you're going to measure results, everything just starts clicking. And so on our end, at first clients are like, wow, we're investing a lot of time on just the customer profile before we jump into tactics. Our ideal client loves that because after we have those conversations, they get insane new clarity around who they should focus on and also equally who they should not focus on. Um, it opens up their eyes to significant opportunities.
Well, it ties into, I think it was 10x is easier than 2x we read last year, where if a prospect comes to us and says, yeah, you're like, hey, who are you targeting? They're like, everyone. Why? Why would you waste your energy on everyone? Everyone is not truly your real customer. And I think it's like really hard for an owner to say no. And that's kind of where the struggle comes in and why you as an entrepreneur really align with our prospects and other business owners by saying no to the wrong things or like not the perfect thing. You're saying yes to the right things. You have a lot more energy to spend on it, which is partly why I think strategy feels unsuccessful a lot of times by the time a customer comes to an agency, they're like overwhelmed. They've quote tried everything. It's because it's just so unfocused. I would say strategy gives you that focus. And I even see it a lot on the operational side of things. Like right now, I'm seeing some sadly layoffs in a lot of industries. And these poor people are trying to get jobs and they're applying for jobs that I guess aren't really there. And so I'm seeing these really sad stories of companies who didn't create a good strategy even for their recruiting and talent acquisition efforts. And they're missing out and creating like really bad brand juju with these horrible experiences for these candidates. And the same thing happens, I think, with your customer, where if they're not the ideal customer, but they don't even know that because you're not even communicating that, it creates a bad brand experience. And it translates into so many areas of the business, even inside the business, right? Like with our own employees and team members. If they don't know what our strategy is, how do they know on a day-to-day basis how successful they're going to be?
Love that. I imagine, obviously, from your point of view, you know, I'll never forget many years ago when we invested a lot of energy on building a pretty comprehensive strategy for one of our clients. When you obviously had to oversee and work with our team on implementing a pretty, detailed strategy, you said numerous times, uh, I'm not sure how you worded it, but how much you appreciated the strategy because it felt like you were, back to the car analogy, heading to the destination in the most efficient way possible, understanding the purpose and why. Whereas in the past, when you worked in situations that didn't have the strategy, you were implementing what was part of the scope, but didn't really understand truly why. And so I'd love to, like, maybe Sarah, if you don't mind, if you're comfortable with that, maybe kind of diving in a little deeper to kind of give your perspective, because the challenge that I run into often is we often are speaking to, the owner or executive team of these, mid-market sized companies or the chief marketing officer or VP of marketing, and they just love and eat up the strategy because it finally gives them like the direction they're looking for. But then it's like, how are we gonna get all this stuff done? And I don't know how you and the team figure it out, but every time it blows me away. So can you maybe give her from some perspective? Because I think that the visionary person listening to this, understanding that there's work to be done and the benefit this would have around it to make that process more realistic.
Hmm. So thinking about, there's probably two ways I'd look at it. Like for me, inside the business, it was so critical because I wanted to know that what I was doing made a difference. So from like an employee Sarah side of things, I appreciated a company that had a strategy because I knew where I fit into it. And it felt like I had autonomy in my decisions because it wasn't so rigid, it was flexible, but I still knew where the destination was. And it helped guide my execution to feel a lot more impactful by knowing what the destination was. And it's kind of like if you've ever been in a class, if you or imagine being in a college class and you just had to read all these random things or just do random stuff. And at the end of the quarter, you were like, "So what's my grade?" And they're like, "Wow, I don't know. How'd you do?" Well, the whole point was to learn something, to become better at something. And so strategy sort of gives you that space to become better at. And then what you do is then you iterate on it. And I think that's partly the piece that might get missed a little bit is because there is so much energy and effort going into the strategy, it's okay to pivot once you've learned from that, which is sort of like the second piece is how do you then take all the learnings, you've done the efforting on the strategy, the tactics. Now what? Now can you readjust your strategy, which is yes, necessary, required, and okay.
Love that. I guess I always appreciate again when you give these perspectives because even though me and you are very aligned, we think very differently, which I think is a good thing. And so every time, we're working our butts off to complete, one of these large, strategy projects for our clients, and our team obviously is so excited about it. And then when you follow up with, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing on how to deliver it because it's so clear, it really helps validate from in my head the effort we're putting into it. Because as you know, watching us go through all of this, it is a lot of work to build this strategy. And every time we do this for clients, I just love the entire experience and then seeing how much value they get from getting the clarity from the recommendations.
Well, and I think too, what's kind of fun is if you think about strategy as not just this one thing, it's actually something in everything. So one of the like mini ways I would say, you may not realize this, but in a way, when you would come back from conferences and stuff, you would like just murder everyone with ideas. And I'll
Very
never forget having this meeting with you. And I'm like, I have to tell you a really hard thing is like everyone's so overwhelmed by your 20-page presentation of all the things that you want us to do. what do you want me to execute on? Because it's kind of all over the place. And we're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And so now you and I have a strategy when we come back from conferences and run it by me. And then I talk about how it impacts like the marketing plan or whatever plan that particular conference is then impacting. And so I think there's like ways to execute strategy inside of a business in lots of little ways, and then having like the bigger way. So if you have a visionary, the strategy is really like your vision, and then having an integrator, implementer, or some sort of second in command, it really helps them use their awesome skill set to execute on your desires. And then you get together and talk about it like every 90 days if you're on EOS or some sort of business operating system. It is the same point to iterate. You're given that opportunity to keep adjusting. And I think it's really important to just remember that as long as you are putting as much energy and effort as you can into something long term, you're either going to see results or you won't, but you'll know the answer by the end of it. You'll know if it worked or not. And I think that's hard for a lot of businesses to like commit to something like that. So when you reflect back on your career and you've done a lot of really cool strategies, what's one that you thought was so impactful that you to this day still cannot forget?
Gosh, good questions today. I have a lot. So, and I guess to be concise, let me just maybe share one that to this day, and this happened, my gosh, probably 10 years ago, but I still talk about it because when I talk about this story, at least high level, to prospective new clients, it does resonate with them to see the value in investing the time and energy because, yes, we're doing a bulk of the work for them, but they have to still be involved. And it could take, a good 60 days or so to really build a smart strategy. But I'll never forget about maybe 10 or so years ago. And if the client's listening to this, hopefully they appreciate this story because they're still a current client of ours, which obviously I'm over the moon excited about. But they contacted us, similar to what I mentioned when we first kicked off this episode, is they needed help with improving their Google ads. They had their agency in place before. It wasn't really going well. And so we came in and started having conversation about the why and talking through like, well, why'd you pick Google ads? I'm not saying Google ads is wrong, but what about it is why you picked it? And what do you feel about it is not working well? And they were like, their answer to me was, well, a lot of our ideal clients are on Google when they start the journey looking for a manufacturing firm like us. But I think in hindsight, looking at this, we're struggling to figure out why this is not performing well. And so then, not to be snarky, but then we started talking through, well, walk us through the strategy, not the Google ad campaign, but the strategy that you're using for the business. And they basically pulled up then the ads, like, well, this is the strategy. I'm like, well, this is more the copy, the ad you're trying to use to generate curiosity. And I'm like, and to be honest, not to be, jerky here, because I know you're feeling a lot of pain and that's why we're here to help you. I'm reading this ad copy and I could literally just swap out your company name and put any other manufacturing firm that does what you do into these ads. There's nothing here that's really telling your secret sauce or your special story, and it just sounds so vague. And I think the strategy part is where this is lacking because in looking at this, I can't even tell who you're focusing on using words that could potentially appeal to someone in procurement or engineering, or an executive. It's all over the place. I know you're trying to cram a lot in. It's probably because you don't have clarity on who your ideal customer is. So let's take a step back and walk us through that. And they're like, well, it's all those people you just talked about. I'm like, okay. I'm like, why do they want to buy from you? They're like, well, like we're like everyone else. Maybe we can do a better job at timing or pricing. I'm like, ugh. So they were really struggling with thinking about how to tell us that story. So we said, okay, let's just stop for a second here. I want you to take our team into your facility, and they have a massive manufacturing facility, and I want you to walk us through. And so they're walking us through and they're showing us, their massive multi-million dollar machines and what they do. And it's very much around, you know, features and very little talking about benefits. And so then I'm like, okay, there has to be a better way to understand how to create a connection to their customer. So I saw a ton of boxes all over the place that had customer names on it. And so, our client can, again, because like most companies, you're so inside your business, it's hard to understand, what could be valuable to explain a story. So I would stop at every major box I would see with some company I had no clue was. And I'm like, okay, pause, walk me through who this company is and why they're buying it from you. And then the head of sales would pull out one of the products, that component that they built, and would tell us the story. And, for example, he told one of these stories about there's this massive healthcare company that was doing operations. They invented a system where rather than having, a 5 to 10 inch, cut through your body to do the operation, they've designed a product that would only be about an inch, and it would basically have all the various different tools going through, their aluminum product that would allow not only faster recovery, but also a reduction of issues with infections and whatnot. And he lit up telling the story. So then we walked around, I mean, massive manufacturing facility, and probably had a dozen stories like that. Went back in the room, and I'm like, I'm curious now, back to my question I asked you an hour ago about your business. Now tell me from the customer point of view. And we cannot get the client to stop talking. They just lit up. And I'm like, that ties into your strategy. Now what we got to do is take what you just told us, find more people like that, and build a story around how you can position your company to really drive profitable growth around building a proper strategy. And then next thing you know, we basically took a step back, spent the next 2 months or so on interviewing their customers, both current and prospective, interviewing their staff, doing a ton of market research, and came back with a strategy that truly differentiated their brand to the point where we hear from the client all the time about how they would not have gone to where they are now, which is significantly bigger of an organization. They've actually have built two different locations and grown so much because of how well their company is handling all these opportunities. And that's really where I get super excited about, is that if we can focus less on only your, business goals and objectives, and focusing a bit more on the pain points and needs of your ideal customer, and using that to help tell your story, the opportunities are significant. And then so once the strategy was done and the client bought off on it, then in month 3 or so, we started executing, but executing on these tactics in a very intentional way. And the performance after about 30 or 45 days was 3 or 4 times better than it was prior to that, using the exact same tactics. And the clients then got calls from these people who already were kind of pre-qualified because they were engaging with the story in such a very unique way. And so it just made the entire marketing approach a lot more effective. And so it's one that I'm excited about because I still speak to this client all the time. And they keep bringing up, how valuable that was. And it just really helps me validate why we do what we do.
I love that story so much. I think it's so impactful to hear like an actual client story. And, we have to keep reiterating that too. Like what worked then doesn't work now. And as an agency, we have to continue to innovate. And so do they. And it's, an awesome partnership. And I just love hearing the origin story of that one. So yay. Thank you. Well, strategy is super fun and it's also a little bit overwhelming, but we're here to help and we actually like enjoy looking at strategies and helping people. And I know you're always open to a call. So if anyone ever wants to reach out and pick Jay's brain, please feel free. Shoot us an email at podcast@stringcaninteractive.com. And Jay, this was an awesome episode on
I enjoyed it.
driving blindfold.
Or
It's
hopefully
like
not
not
blindfolded.
having a strategy. All right.
All right,
Well,
thanks
thanks for
everyone.
this episode of Revenue Rewired. We'll catch you guys next time.
All right, bye.
Bye bye. Thanks for tuning in to the Revenue Rewired podcast. Send us your questions to podcast@stringcaninteractive.com and follow us for more insights to drive your business forward.